What if some of the biggest brands in America survived because of the very people they once ignored? Behind the success of McDonald's, Pepsi, Cadillac, Nike, and many other famous names is a part of history that rarely gets told. When those companies began to lose ground, Black America helped create the trends, restore their relevance, and pull them back up. But over time, that contribution was often reduced to little more than a few faded lines in the company's own histories. So how many billion-dollar brands survived because of African Americans? This is Hidden Black Chronicles, and together we bring buried stories back into the light. Today, we uncover how African Americans helped save some of the most famous brands in America. Number 1. Cadillac. Just look at a Cadillac rolling through an American street today, and it is easy to forget that this name once sat on General Motors' operating table. The polished badge, the long body, the quiet weight of luxury that has clung to Cadillac for almost a century. All of it makes the brand look as if it was born to live at the very top of the American dream. People speak of Cadillac the way they speak of big houses, deep bank accounts, leather seats, grand hotels, wide boulevards, and the kind of respect society is supposed to give a person who has made it. Yet beneath that shine sits a story most people were never taught. When the Great Depression nearly dragged Cadillac to the bottom, the people who helped show it a way back were the very customers white America had spent years trying to make invisible. By the early 1930s, America had little room left for dreams wrapped in chrome. The Great Depression swept through streets, banks, factories, and kitchen tables. A luxury car suddenly sounded almost out of place beside job lines, shuttered homes, and families watching everything they had built slip away. Cadillac, once the pride of GM, fell into a decline so steep that executives could no longer pretend everything was under control. Many accounts say its sales had collapsed by more than 84% from their pre-depression peak. Inside the cold discussions at General Motors, Cadillac was no longer only a symbol of prestige. It was being weighed as a piece that might have to be cut away to save the larger body of the corporation. Right when Cadillac was being treated like an asset that could be sacrificed, a middle manager named Nicholas Dreystadt entered the story in a way almost nobody at GM expected. He was not one of the most powerful men in the company. He was not the obvious face chosen to rescue a brand bleeding sales. But Dreystadt asked the board for 10 minutes. 10 minutes to say out loud a truth Cadillac had kept itself blind to for years. Wealthy black people were still buying Cadillacs. They were simply being forced to buy them in the shadows. What Dreystadt found was enough to make that GM boardroom uncomfortable. Cadillac had a policy that almost tied its own hands. It would not sell directly to black customers. But when he looked across dealerships and followed the real transactions happening behind all that polished glass, he saw that plenty of wealthy black customers were still finding ways to get Cadillacs. Doctors, lawyers, singers, prize fighters, business owners, people with money, reputation, and standing in their communities had not turned their backs on Cadillac. Cadillac had turned its back on them. Because they were not allowed to enter the buying process like ordinary customers, many black buyers had to pay several $100s more for a white person to purchase the car in their name. Same car, same money. But white customers got the handshake in the open, while black customers were pushed through a humiliating middleman. And when banks refused to lend to them because of race, these customers did the very thing that should have awakened Cadillac much sooner. They paid the full amount in cash. So while GM worried that Cadillac was dying from a shortage of buyers, a near-perfect customer base was standing right in front of them. Wealthy, eager to own the product, low risk, highly profitable, ready to pay on the spot. But racial prejudice pushed those customers away from the front door, then allowed them to buy Cadillac's cars through the back. When Dreystadt laid this out in the boardroom, he was not simply offering a sales strategy. He was holding up a mirror to GM. Cadillac was gasping for air while refusing to openly accept money from the very people who could help it breathe again. GM eventually agreed to remove that discriminatory policy. Not long after, Cadillac's sales began to rise sharply. By 1934, while the Great Depression still cast its shadow over America, Cadillac was reported to have grown by about 70%. It sounded like a business miracle, but behind that number were black customers who had once been forced to buy dignity under somebody else's name. The most unsettling part of this story is the way history so often frames it without giving proper credit to African Americans. Business history loves sharp managers, bold decisions, and clever turnaround strategies. It rarely pauses long enough over the image of black customers paying cash, paying extra, using someone else's name, and still helping pull Cadillac back from the edge. If a brand can be rescued by the very people it once refused to serve openly, then who exactly is history still owing its thanks to? Today, Cadillac still carries the posture of American success. But beneath that metal shine are the fingerprints of successful black people who were told to stand to the side even while they were helping the brand survive. They did not enter this story as a faceless crowd. They entered it in white coats with legal briefs, with cash laid on the counter, in a time when America still wanted them to lower their eyes. Cadillac survived, while many of their names disappeared into the blank space between sales reports. And that blank space is the part of history that still needs to be brought back into the light. Number 2, McDonald's. Today, McDonald's has become so woven into American life that people almost forget to question how it got there. Drive past a highway exit, an airport, a school, a shopping center, or an ordinary street corner, and there it is, the familiar golden arches. For many people, it means a quick meal, a bag of fries, a cheap burger after a long day of work. But there is a truth that stayed buried for years. There was a time when McDonald's could not hold its ground in many black neighborhoods without the very African Americans the company had not placed in positions of ownership. After Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in April 1968, Chicago sank into grief, anger, and disorder. Black neighborhoods had already lived for years under redlining. Job loss, disappearing grocery stores, banks that turned their backs, and outside businesses that came in, took money, and carried the profits away. When the smoke from the unrest began to clear, some McDonald's locations in black neighborhoods were left struggling. Counters sat quiet. Workers did not return. And community trust had grown so thin that even a bright logo could not pull people through the door. For McDonald's, this was a threat to revenue and property. For African Americans on the South Side, it exposed a painful question. Why was neighborhood money still feeding a major brand, while ownership remained outside the hands of the people who lived there? Operation Breadbasket saw that McDonald's was missing more than customers. It was missing trust. If the company wanted to keep selling in black neighborhoods, it could no longer leave black people only on the paying side of the counter, while ownership stayed with outsiders. So the demand became clear. Hire black workers, do business with black-owned companies, and let black people own the stores that were surviving on black community dollars. Herman Petty became the name that opened that door. In late 1968, he took over a McDonald's in Woodlawn on Chicago's South Side, reopening it on December 21st. As one of the first black McDonald's franchise owners in the city. From the outside, it may have looked like another fast food restaurant turning its lights back on. But for a neighborhood that had just lived through loss, the sight of a black man standing in the place of ownership meant something deeper. Petty hired local people, brought families back through the door, and helped turn a business that once felt like outside property to a place with a familiar face and a familiar voice. From Herman Petty's store, the door began to open wider for other black franchise owners. By 1972, they formed the National Black McDonald's Operators Association, giving them a shared voice in front of a corporation much larger than any one store. These restaurants did more than sell burgers. They created jobs in the neighborhood, supported schools, churches, scholarships, youth teams, and helped McDonald's regain something no advertising campaign could simply purchase: trust. But behind the shine of the golden arches, real power still stayed with the corporation. McDonald's owned the land, collected rent, took a percentage of sales, chose locations, and set operating rules. A black owner could bring a store back to life day after day, while the ground beneath that store still did not belong to him. So when we look at the golden arches today, Herman Petty's story should not be reduced to a clean little line in franchise history. It reminds us that African Americans helped save McDonald's with trust, labor, and community credibility at the very moment the brand needed them most. And if a community could bring a store back to life, why did the greatest power so often remain somewhere else? Number 3. Pepsi. Pepsi is one of those names that feels almost built into American life. You see it in grocery stores, stadiums, Super Bowl commercials, concerts, fast food restaurants, family cookouts, and in that decades-long debate with Coca-Cola. But if you go back to the 1940s, Pepsi was not standing in that kind of shine. Coca-Cola had already claimed so much of America's soft drink identity, while Pepsi had to find another way forward if it wanted to get out from under that giant shadow. And that way forward ran through a place many major brands kept looking past: Black America. During the Jim Crow era, black people were still buying products, still drinking soda, still creating real consumer power. But American advertising often treated them like they did not deserve to appear in a decent frame. In many posters and mainstream campaigns, black people were either erased completely or pushed into images so degrading they were hard to look at. Coca-Cola was powerful enough that it did not feel pressure to change quickly. Pepsi was in a different position. It needed a new market, a new loyalty, a customer base its rival had not yet respected the way it should have. In 1940, Pepsi began hiring black salesmen like Herman Smith and, later, Edward F. Boyd led a team focused on reaching African American communities directly. They brought Pepsi into black newspapers, black colleges, churches, local stores, and neighborhoods that Coca-Cola and many other big brands still had not taken seriously. For black customers at that time, seeing a major brand enter their spaces and speak to them with respect already meant something different. Pepsi's ads in black newspapers like the Pittsburgh Courier showed black families, black students, and black consumers as polished, confident, and worthy of respect. That helped Pepsi build a relationship Coca-Cola had missed. African Americans bought Pepsi, talked about Pepsi, shared Pepsi, and through their spending power, helped the brand close the distance with the giant Coca-Cola. Today, Pepsi is still tied to music, sports, big stages, and popular culture. But behind that journey are the footsteps of Edward F. Boyd, Herman Smith, and the black salesmen who walked into communities major brands had long overlooked. They were not only selling bottles of soda, they helped Pepsi understand that a community ignored for too long could still become the place that decides who keeps moving forward and who gets left behind in America's race. Number 4. Nike. Looking at Nike today, it is hard to believe that in the early 1980s the company was losing ground in the very market it hoped to dominate. The running boom had begun to cool off. Reebok was riding the rise of aerobics, and Nike was dealing with slowing sales, losses, and rounds of layoffs. The swoosh did not yet carry the kind of power that makes people line up around the block. If Nike failed to find a new direction, it risked falling behind in a sneaker industry that was changing fast. The turning point came in 1984, when Nike placed its future in the hands of a young black rookie from the Chicago Bulls named Michael Jordan. Jordan himself preferred Adidas, while Converse was still the familiar name on NBA courts. To win him over, Nike made a bold offer: an entire shoe line built around a player who had not yet appeared in a single professional game. Then Jordan stepped onto the court, and the gamble made in a boardroom suddenly came alive. His speed, his elevation, and the way he carried himself made it almost impossible to look away. Air Jordan arrived in 1985 and quickly moved beyond anything Nike had expected. People watched Jordan rise toward the rim, and saw the confidence of a black athlete taking his place at the center of American culture. Black neighborhoods, street courts, hip-hop, and urban fashion carried Air Jordan far beyond the NBA. Spike Lee brought that energy into Nike's advertising through his character Mars Blackman. Kids wore the shoes to school, rappers made them part of their image, and soon suburban teenagers and international buyers were following the same wave. Black America gave the product a story, a status, and an emotional weight that no logo could have created on its own. Michael Jordan helped Nike regain its momentum and opened the door to a business model the company would later repeat, with generations of black athletes. Air Jordan became one of the most valuable product lines in sports history, while Nike climbed from a struggling position into a global empire. So when the history of Nike celebrates the company's boldness, another part of the story deserves to be heard just as clearly. Nike offered the contract, but Michael Jordan's talent and the reach of black culture turned that contract into billions of dollars. At a time when Nike badly needed a way out of decline, Black America gave the company an icon the whole world wanted to wear. Number 5. Timberland. When people see the classic yellow Timberland boot today, few still think of it as work gear made for laborers in New England. It has become part of hip-hop, streetwear, music videos, and the visual identity of New York City. But that transformation did not begin inside a Timberland boardroom. It began on black streets, where rappers saw something in that rugged boot that the company itself had not fully understood. Timberland launched in 1973 with waterproof footwear made for people who worked outdoors, and for years, that was the image the company wanted to protect. Then, in the early 1990s, the notorious B.I.G., Wu-Tang Clan, Nas, Mobb Deep, and later Jay-Z began wearing Timberlands in photographs, music videos, and on stage. In the hands of hip-hop, a work boot became tied to New York winters, city pavement toughness, and the kind of presence that did not need polished clothes to command respect. The influence spread quickly. Black youth began wearing Timbs as part of their identity, and before long, fans in the suburbs and far beyond were following their lead. A product once made for a narrow working-class market suddenly became something an entire generation wanted. Yet accounts from that period suggest Timberland was uneasy about being associated too closely with hip-hop. The company benefited from the wave, but it took time to understand that the customers it had treated like a passing trend were opening the door to mainstream culture. So what truly made Timberland an icon? The company's advertising campaigns, or the black artists who carried those boots onto stages before the fashion industry understood their value? Timberland still sells the image of the street around the world today, but the first footprints of that transformation lead back to Biggie, Wu-Tang, and the hip-hop community that turned a construction boot into a billion-dollar symbol. Number 6. Adidas. In the early 1980s, Adidas was starting to lose its hold on young Americans as Nike gained ground, and sneaker culture changed fast. What rarely gets mentioned is that the cultural revival of the three stripes began with Run-DMC, 3 black artists from Queens who had never been hired by Adidas to promote anything. They wore Adidas tracksuits, fedora hats, and laceless superstar sneakers because that was the real style coming out of New York streets. When My Adidas was released in 1986, those shoes became a symbol of identity and pride across black communities. During a concert at Madison Square Garden, Run-DMC asked the crowd to hold their Adidas shoes in the air. Thousands of superstars rose across the arena. An Adidas representative who witnessed it saw something no market report could have measured. Hip-hop could make an entire generation love a product without a traditional advertising campaign. Soon afterward, Adidas signed Run-DMC, opening a new chapter in the relationship between hip-hop and sneaker companies. From there, Adidas found its way back into American youth culture. The 3 stripes traveled from black neighborhoods into the suburbs, then across the world. Adidas still profits from music and street fashion today, but that road was opened by Run-DMC, and an arena filled with people holding their sneakers high. Number 7. Fenty Beauty. Before Fenty Beauty arrived, the beauty industry had spent decades making money from the promise that every woman could look and feel more beautiful. But at the makeup counter, countless black women were still mixing several foundation shades together, just to get somewhere close to their own skin tone. From the days of Eunice Johnson and the Ebony Fashion Fair, that need had already been made clear. Yet major companies continued treating deeper shades like a market too small to deserve serious investment. In 2017, Rihanna stepped into that gap with Fenty Beauty and 40 foundation shades at launch. The deeper tones quickly became some of the most sought-after products, forcing the entire industry to confront what it had ignored for far too long. Black women had never lacked interest, spending power, or love for beauty. What they lacked were products created with the understanding that they belonged in that market too. After Fenty, major brands rushed to expand their shade ranges, and the change became known as the Fenty effect. It raises a difficult question. Did the beauty industry only begin to truly see black women after Rihanna proved that respect could also generate enormous profits? Fenty did not rescue an old brand. It forced an entire industry to change before it got left behind. Number 8. Tommy Hilfiger. In the early 1990s, Tommy Hilfiger still carried the image of classic American preppy fashion, polo shirts, red, white, and blue colors, and clothing aimed largely at the white middle class. Then hip-hop stepped in, pulling oversized shirts, bold logos, and Tommy jeans out of the catalog and onto stages, television screens, and city streets. Snoop Dogg wore Tommy Hilfiger on television, while Grand Puba mentioned the brand in his music. But Aaliyah became the figure who helped turn Tommy into the look of an entire generation. In the brand's 1996 campaign, she appeared in a crop top, loose-fitting pants, and a Tommy boxer waistband showing above her jeans. Soft, strong, and completely confident. That image carried the brand into a different world, where fashion was tied to personality and to the way young black people chose to define themselves. Hip-hop and R&B made Tommy Hilfiger feel younger, more alive, and more desirable. The style moved from black neighborhoods into the suburbs and then around the world. So when people talk about Tommy's success in the 1990s, Aaliyah's name and the influence of black culture should not disappear behind the company's sales reports. Number 9. Hennessy today. Hennessy is closely tied to hip-hop, nightlife, and the image of success. But few people realize how much of its position in the American market was built through black consumers. At a time when other luxury liquor brands were still focused mainly on wealthy white customers. Beginning in the mid-20th century, Hennessy advertised in African-American publications and showed up at events within black communities. But hip-hop was what carried this French cognac out of old traditional spaces of luxury and placed it at the center of popular culture. Throughout the 1990s, Tupac Shakur, Nas, and many other rappers repeatedly mentioned Hennessy in their music, interviews, and public image. For young black audiences, the bottle came to represent success, hard-earned experience, and nights of celebration. After surviving more than most people could see, without a traditional advertising campaign, hip-hop placed the name Hennessy before millions of listeners. So who truly transformed a European cognac into a symbol of modern American culture? The marketing department, or the black artists who gave it a story and emotional meaning? Hennessy still benefits from its connection to hip-hop today, and the influence of Tupac, Nas, and black culture remains part of that value. Number 10. MTV. Today, MTV is remembered as the network that changed the way the world listened to and experienced music. But when it launched in 1981, that screen was almost entirely reserved for white artists. Music videos by black performers were rarely shown, even though MTV presented itself as the voice of young America. That began to change in 1983 with Michael Jackson's Billie Jean. At first, MTV was still reluctant to play it. CBS Records reportedly had to pressure the network into putting the video on the air. Once viewers saw Jackson in that black suit, stepping across glowing pavement and controlling every movement on the screen, they could not look away. Beat It, followed by Thriller, brought enormous audiences to MTV. Michael Jackson helped pull the network beyond its image as a rock channel created mainly for white viewers. He turned the music video into a major cultural event and forced MTV to recognize that black artists belonged at the center of American music. So did MTV create Michael Jackson? Or did Michael Jackson save MTV from becoming a narrow music channel that could have quickly faded into irrelevance? Even today, MTV's greatest legacy remains tied to the moment a black artist appeared on its screen and made the whole country stop and watch. These stories leave us with one question: how much of modern America was built by people history chose not to credit? Subscribe to Hidden Black Chronicles and help us bring more buried stories back into the light where they belong.